I'm Tracy Sofra, founder of Wow Women Group. Welcome to my Wow podcast series, Success Circles, where we believe success leaves clues. Today, I will be speaking to the visionary Megan Gilmour. Megan is a social innovator, global change maker, tech entrepreneur, and champion for human-centered solutions to complex social problems. In 2010, after a 25-year career in government, publishing, and international aid and development, Megan's son was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. Through her experience in addressing system-wide change, she took on the glaring inequity facing children with serious illness, and that was their isolation to time away from school. She co-founded Missing School, a now internationally recognised not-for-profit. Megan then moved to designing the world's first education innovation that connects seriously ill students to their classrooms through telepresence robots. Her extensive experience throughout her career and a life-changing personal crisis, this is what led Megan to initiate this important program for kids who are missing school. Megan now teaches and mentors change makers to build enterprises for social good, and she has co-founded tech startups in the global development and the assistive robot sector. Megan is a Churchill Fellow, a media spokesperson, and a Keynote and TEDx speaker. She was a 2019 finalist for the ACT Australian of the Year, and Megan has won the 2019 ACT for Purpose and Social Enterprise Telstra Business Women's Award. Megan pursues lasting social change at a scale, and through the power of human connection, shifts people from passive observers to active change makers. And I just love this about you, Megan. Welcome, Megan Gilmour. Okay, so Megan, just wanted to start by asking you to talk a little bit about yourself and your professional journey so far and about missing school.
Okay. I will start by saying I've had a very eclectic career, and I guess as I explain a little bit about it, it makes more sense to me looking backwards on it than it has going through it. I often found myself thinking, why am I here? Why don't I have one of those careers that just goes from sort of one linear step to the next, and I seem to be jumping around. So I'll start with when I was 15, 16, and I left school, which was probably my first experiment in social innovation. I was a high academic achiever, and I think at that time in what was the school certificate, I achieved, I was in the top 10% of the state. And despite that, I wanted to leave school, much to my parents', despair, and teachers, and everyone tried to talk me out of it. But I was determined to go and have some fun. And I said to everyone, I'll come back and do what I need to do, which I have. So I started out by going to business college, and after business college, just getting some skills, some typing skills and basic stuff like that. And then I went on to work in the New South Wales Premier's department. So that was my first ever job. And I very quickly sort of went into, the legal department, and then an opportunity came up to apply to be on a minister's personal staff. So I joined the personal staff of the Minister for Finance way back then. And I think I was the youngest member of a minister's personal staff at the time, and I think around the age of 18 or something like that. And I learnt a lot in that job. It was a wonderful experience working at Parliament House and all those sorts of things. The minister, there was a state election, and the minister lost his seat. So I think actually the government changed as well. So that was that job. I then left and went into publishing. So I worked as a personal assistant or executive assistant to the publisher of a magazine, a staple of magazines actually, in contract publishing, and it was at the time, Ansett Airways, and so they were airline publications, you know, the little ones you get in the back of the seat.
Yes.
So I learned a lot then, worked there for a few years, and then decided to leave. And in order to get me to stay, the publisher said, look, I have an opportunity coming up in London to run our office there or set up our office there. And so in my early 20s, I headed off on my own to London to look after a magazine there and set up office and run office there. So that was a great experience, and you know, travelled and got to experience what it was like to live overseas and to miss home.
Scared?
No, I don't think, I can't remember being scared. All I remember thinking at the time is, this is so perfect for me. There are a whole range of personal reasons why I needed a change, and it was one of those ones where every single element lines up. You know, I didn't have the money to travel, but now I was getting a job to travel. Yeah. And you know, I was going to be getting a place partly paid for to live in overseas, whereas I just bought a unit here in somewhere in Sydney, and all the money was going into the mortgage for that, and I was breaking up with my then boyfriend, and so it was just one of those ones that fell into place and made everything sort of, you know, turn a corner that I wanted to turn. So I headed off and did that, and that was such an amazing experience with so many lessons and, you know, growth opportunities, a lot of them to do with living away from home and, you know, discovering the world outside of home, but also appreciating home at the same time. And when I came back engaged to that very same boyfriend who had come over later. And so I needed a job. I left the publishing job and went to work in a small consultancy in international aid and development. And that is where I spent the next couple of decades. Wow. Or at least, 16 years. So, and that took me up to the time when my son got sick, Darcy, and which was a real line in the sand. So, and that really brings us up to the story of missing school. So we can probably talk about that one in a little bit more detail. But my great passion was working in, you know, I ended up working on projects across 24 countries and in social and economic development. And I really felt deeply passionate about that work, and like I'd found my ground, you know, in terms of my career. And
it
got
resonated.
A lot of that. Yeah, it resonated with my values and my place in the world and my worldview. So, yeah.
And so about missing school, tell me how that Darcy getting ill, how that led to missing school.
Yes.
Darcy was how old at the time?
Yes, so Darcy was 10 years old at the time when he became unwell. He was really 9 actually, but he had a bone marrow transplant when he was 10. That was at the end of December. That was December 2010. He had a bone marrow transplant. He was very sick for a year before it, and he was also very sick for a year after it. So 2 years all in all, he was sort of on death's door, really. And any parent who loves their child would find that unimaginable. And I won't have to say too much about what that would mean. So we lived most of the time in a hospital. We had to move to Sydney because we live in the ACT, and he was being treated at the Sydney Children's Hospital. And so, you know, all sorts of things went on. One of the things that happened was that I needed to leave my job and to care for him, and which of course I didn't give a second thought to. But across the time of being in that hospital and seeing what I saw and experiencing what I experienced, I realized two things. The first thing that I realized was that I couldn't go back to my industry, and that was a surprise and a shock to me, given what I've told you about how important it was to me. And the second thing I realised was that children in those circumstances, that's children who have a serious illness or injury, they're actually overlooked or forgotten in many ways in terms of their education. And it's because they're not at school. And so when they're not at school, and they're sick, people sort of think, oh, well, they've just got to get better. You know, they get a little bit of hospital schooling when they're in hospital, but here in Australia, nothing when they're at home. And of course, that's the time in their life when they most need their friends, when they most need a sense of normality, and when they most need to be with their own community to be remembered. So all of the frustration that took place through that discovery and watching, I guess, the inability of the system to respond to those needs for those children, putting that up against my experience in social and economic development and human rights and all those sorts of things, that was sort of a melting pot of opportunity out of a very tragic, hard situation. Now,
how amazing.
Yeah, and I have to say at this point that Darcy survived. Darcy is, he finished school last year and he's now on his gap year in Japan, which was his wish, laying in that hospital bed. He just wanted to get to Japan someday. So you can imagine how it felt for us to put him on the plane. Yeah. So, and the reason I couldn't go back to my career was that I discovered really what it was like to be a disempowered person for the first time ever. You know, I've lived a middle class life, I guess, and at least in my teens, and probably, you know, a much more privileged life in my adulthood. And I don't think I ever really knew what it was like to have no power until that time, and not to be able to control a situation just because you choose to, or not to be able to just walk away, and to actually have to stay in the hot seat of, I guess, suffering, if you like, which it was, and to actually find resolution in that gave me a greater understanding of the ways in which my career and the industry I was working in was no longer going to be able to serve my values.
And that's why you couldn't go back?
That's why I couldn't go back, yeah.
You'd gone
and that hurt
too
a lot.
far.
I'd gone too far. I knew the world in a new way. And to be sort of given help or aid or support when sometimes it's not the right kind of support, or you can't say no to it because you feel so vulnerable that support might stop. And I'm talking now about charitable support and other types of support like that, made me realise that some of the things we were doing in our industry in international aid and development were not compatible with my current experience as a person who felt disempowered. And having said that, you know, I was still living in a developed country, you know, in a hospital setting with fantastic medical care and all of these other things. So I'm not even going to compare myself to people who are in, you know, situations of dire poverty and violence and other things, but it just gave me enough insight to want to take a turn.
And that's all you needed. I mean, obviously the trauma of that, I'm a parent of 2 kids, and I can't handle it when they get a scratch or a bruise, or, you know, So it really is unimaginable as a mother. Life stopped for those few years, didn't it? Life just stopped and you were in survival mode and you did whatever you had to do to keep your son alive, whilst going through the realization that I can't imagine the isolation of these kids, because what would happen, all of a sudden they're out of the system and nobody knows what's happening to them. So like in Darcy's case, 2 years. Was it roughly 2 years he was totally out of the system?
No, I mean, most of that time he was in the hospital system, in and out, but for a straight 14 months he was, and he was actually in protective isolation for at least 6 months. Full protective isolation, that's in a single hospital room with
So
no contact outside world. No, he'd have a teacher come from the hospital school some days, where they'd get maybe half an hour at the bedside. But we've got to think here about, well, what does education mean? It's not some people bringing some worksheets to you.
Good question. Great question.
Yeah, and
you're talking about the social aspect and the connectivity and everything that goes with it, particularly at that age where they're developing, growing and understanding who they are. There's so much more going on.
And these kids in this circumstance are going through hell and going through a situation that's so unlike a childhood as we would understand it to be, a good childhood, that is, which he had up until that point.
Well, as we all know it, as we all have, well, not as we all, but I've experienced, you've experienced.
Yeah, and many people. And what we'd hope, what we hope for all children to have. And so I learned everything that I know now about this context from listening to Darcy and watching him and from what he told me. And, I probably over time realised more myself that, well, the truth of it is at some point in time, about 18 months in, he became so unwell. This is after the transplant as well, which worked, but he still didn't get better. No one knew why, and things were getting worse and worse. And at that point, I could see him starting to lose hope, and he was giving up. And I needed something to show him that he could survive. And that's when I really started to sort of, I guess, ratchet up the school, connection piece and really try hard for him to get that. Because when you're going through that as a kid and there's no upside, well, what's the fight for? It's like his whole life had disappeared, any enjoyment. So I had to show him, I had to give him a way to realise that he could survive, and that's what I turned to, because kids know that they're going to school because they're going to have a future. And if we stop caring about that, what are we telling them? So that's how missing school really started. It started from me sort of trying and then finding a lot of resistance in what seemed to me to be quite a simple thing.
So for you, Megan, do you remember the moment was it a moment? Was it a progression? Was it a light bulb moment where you just went, you know what, this is what's got to happen and I've got to find a way of making, can you tell me a little bit about that moment?
Yeah, there were a few moments there that really added up. And I guess it was, we'd received a lot of support from the school via, kindness, and, there were a few teachers there and people there who were absolutely amazing, and to this day are, really important people to me in that journey. And they were trying. There were some changes at the school, and this is his school here in the ACT, remembering that he was being treated at Sydney Children's Hospital. And those changes were the point of frustration, I think, because what I realised, and this came from my work background, when I started to ask for more support to connect him to his classroom, because remember, we had Skype then and we had some other things, you know, there were some ways. It sort of happened a few times, and then a few things started to coalesce. One thing was that the teacher that he had at that time, you know, he wouldn't show up with the kids who were coming to say hello on Skype. And that would happen regularly on our, you know, 1 day a week for half an hour that we had scheduled. And so I didn't want Darcy to be disappointed. So I'd pre-call and make sure, you know, is it going to happen today? I'd email, yes, it is. And then, you know, as you can guess, it was pretty hard to set Darcy up in his circumstance and get him ready and everything, and then no show. And this happened a few times, and it wasn't just a no show, it was absolute devastation for this kid.
It's unimaginable, really.
Yeah, and don't bother, Mum.
For that moment.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Don't bother, Mum. They're not going to call. And yes, they will. And then to watch that disappointment. So that was the pivotal moment. And I think the other moments were, I started to see that I was getting a lot of resistance to this, and that surprised me because this did seem quite natural. Everyone knows, right, how important school is for a child, and this child was going through some really, really tough times. So when I started to get the resistance because I started to push harder, I realised this wasn't just happening to us, that this was actually a systemic problem, that people didn't know what to do. And my ability to have those conversations, given my work background, meant that I had a lot of agency. And I don't think that was normal. And I think that started to get people a bit worried. And, you know, I said it once, I said, you know, I've arranged meetings between large international agencies and governments in other countries, and I can't arrange a meeting between the principal of the hospital school and the classroom teacher here. I think I'm being blocked, I said. I think that's what's happening. And of course, when you're able to call things out like that, I guess it's even more confronting. But yes, I realised I wasn't being singled out for special treatment, but that I'd touched upon something that I suspected was happening in this situation everywhere across Australia. And later we investigated that after we started missing school, and that is in fact what we found.
Throughout Australia?
Throughout Australia. Some states do better than others, but that is by and large the situation. So and it's because it's a really hard thing to do too. Education systems are really good at scaling delivery of education to a lot of people, students in one location, the school. It's hard for a school operating on that model to deliver an education service to a few people who are not on that location. Now, when I say a few people, there's not any data on this in Australia, in that these kids aren't actually counted in a systematic way, but we've extrapolated from data sets to find that there are an estimated 60,000 students in Australia who miss school often or for long periods because of a serious illness.
Due to illness. That's a huge number.
It's a huge number, and we think it's an underestimate.
Given our population.
Yeah. We think it's an underestimate because we don't think it includes children with mental illnesses. And we know it doesn't count siblings who miss school also in this context. So yeah, it's a conservative number, but it's still a big number.
It's a huge number. So tell me about the robotics of missing school.
Yes, so we got this onto a national agenda through some research in 2015, and we got a Prime Minister's statement of support, and many, many media articles, around 170 media articles across the country. And then we, you know, thought, great, this will change it. And it didn't.
And that was it, the whole bunch of stories, and nothing happened.
No, nothing happened. So I went back to the Commonwealth government and said, you know, not very much is happening in the states, because states and territories deliver education or manage education in Australia. So we've got eight of those. And so the Commonwealth Education Department put money to a research report. So that was the second major thing we did. And that report still hasn't been released. I'm hoping it will be soon. And then came the, you know, so you can imagine this is going on and on. Well, what do we do? Do we just give up? Do we, you know, what's our next step? So the Churchill Fellowship opportunity came up, which it does every year. And I thought it was a great opportunity to be able to go overseas and find out what some countries overseas that we would expect to be doing better. What are they doing? And also because it's a very well-respected award, and so that would also give attention to the cause as well, which it has.
Yep.
And so I visited Finland and Sweden, Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK and Canada, to find out what these countries were doing. And when I was coincidental to that trip, a grant application process emerged right before I left, and the St George Foundation released a large grant, a call for applications at least for a large grant. Their inaugural Inspire grant of up to $600,000 over 3 years. So for at least a year prior to that, I'd been looking for a big pot of money to do a telepresence robot pilot in Australia. And we'd been shortlisted the year before for a Google grant, but didn't get through. And I have to say, I had a mini spiral after that. So I thought, where am I going to find a grant of that size again? And well, a year later, yes. So I drafted the application, which was in 2 stages at that point. And the second, we were shortlisted, and then I had to submit the next part of it before I flew off to Finland. And I literally finalised that grant application in the lounge before I boarded my flight. I ran to my gate actually, because the grant closed while I was in the air, so I had to submit it then or miss out. And I ran to the gate, and they had to sit me down because I was puffing. And
but you got it in.
I got it in. And I promised myself as I was running, I'll never do this again. This is crazy. Why am I always pushing myself? Why am I here doing this? I'm supposed to be. Well,
there's a question.
Getting onto my flight and enjoying myself.
Yeah. You obviously, like the rest of us, have those moments. What am I doing this for? No one's listening. No one cares. Do I give up? Is it just in my head?
Yes.
How did you overcome those moments? What was the thing that kept you going?
The thing that kept me going all the way along, with no word of a lie, is those kids. Anytime I wanted to give up, I would just think to myself, what about the kids? And the feeling and sense that I would be letting them down was just, I just couldn't. And I promised myself when I discovered this problem that I wouldn't turn my back on them, because they don't have a choice. And my tough day is not really that hard. You know, should I do a grant or shouldn't I? As I go off on my Churchill Fellowship with my fully functioning body that I can run to the gate with. So
there's some perspective.
Yeah, and that was it. It was being on that ward and seeing how hard they fight, seeing what we as adults put them through to save their lives, and that's the right thing to do. But we've got to make sure they have a life worth living, and that, you know, if they can survive their illness, that they can be educated and socialized in a way that makes them able to be productive in their life and have a good life. Because that's another thing, you know, that was another pivotal moment for me. What is a life? Is it just about saving a body? It's not. It's about our heart, our mind. It's about our emotion and how we function in the world. And we're whole beings. We're not just a body that's well or diseased. So you know, and I as I've unpacked this, I also know that, you know, there was a point in time when I absolutely struck a deal. And it was, I'll do anything to have him, and that this is my do anything as well. So yeah.
It's an incredible journey. And where does it sit now?
Well, where it sits now is that we won that grant opportunity, and we are in the second year of implementing the second tranche of $200,000 in a national telepresence robot pilot. Well, it's actually turned to a service now because it's scaling. And what that means is that, just for people listening, what these robots do is they live in the classrooms of kids who can't be there because of illness in their own classrooms. And the robots kind of stand in for them and allow them to dial in from hospital or home or wherever they are. And they can see via a video call, like a Skype call. It's not Skype, but it's like Skype. And they can see and hear their classmates and their classroom and their teachers and be seen and heard. And they can even move the robot around as if they're in the room from their remote location. So it's as close as you can get to being there.
That is amazing. And you know, with the technology that we have today, why wouldn't you? And
yeah, it just makes sense.
But it took all of that for you to come up with the brilliant idea of, well, why not?
Yeah, that's right. And across that time, we, you know, the technology became much more available and cheaper. And I think the important thing to say here, and it leads a bit into, you know, my my skills and the way I look at the world, is the technology is innovative, but it's the social innovation that's really the key here. Because we already had Skype and we already had FaceTime across this time, and why wasn't that already happening? You know, why did it take, you know, a robot? And the point is that schools, as I said earlier, just didn't see this problem. They couldn't see the problem. The problem wasn't in the classroom. This was an explained absence. Sick. Tick, doesn't have to be here. That's it. And
but you were on the other side of the problem, watching the pain.
That's it. And that also leads to another important point. These problems and social problems are often solved by those for whom it matters the most, because you can see it and feel it and you know it better than anyone. It's personal, and that's what gets you its skin in the game, you know.
And I'm suspecting that's what keeps you driven at night and in the morning, and all your thoughts and all your energies in that one place, because it is so personal.
Yeah, it is. It's deeply personal, and a promise made to everything that's good in the world, and a promise made to myself that I had the skills and I would do it. And the alternative to that, and let me say I've contemplated the alternative many times, during every day I've worked on this, of stopping. And that alternative, though, is not one that I can tolerate, in that I explain it as, how would I rest my head on the pillow at night knowing that I could do something about this and that I didn't? Yeah,
that's tough.
Yeah,
that's tough, isn't it? That's gut-wrenching stuff. That's
yeah.
When you know you can, when you know you can't, that's a different matter. But when you know you can and you're choosing not to.
Yeah, and the beautiful journey of all that is, because of that, I have discovered things about myself and capabilities within myself that I never would have known that I had. And I mean, I was successful at, my career. I had a good job. I've always had good jobs. I've been respected in my industry. I have, I'm qualified to master's level.
So can we say that this was also a journey of self-discovery at the same time?
Definitely.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Definitely. The thing that was the side gig, the thing that I had to do, the obligation, if you like, turned out to be the thing that really showed me at continually to next level what I could do. And
who you were?
Yeah. And I think that's because I couldn't give up. Do you know what I mean? So I had to keep stretching through, because there wasn't, whilst, logically I could have given up. And as I said, I contemplated that every day. Emotionally, that was unacceptable to me. Therefore, I had to keep going. So I guess what I'm saying here is, when we do push through and when we do keep going, and when we find a problem that's worth solving that we can't tolerate, it is amazing what we can find in ourselves and what we can achieve. And just to put some perspective on that, this robot pilot that I'm talking about is not only a first in Australia, it's probably a first in the world to use this exact type of mobile robot technology. That's robots that move around, that are large, in every state of a country, in a pilot level for this context, across all education systems. So it's we've just moved through with a methodology that's been compelling, and we've catalysed change, beyond what I guess I could have even expected myself.
It's so visionary, Megan. It's so visionary. It's like sci-fi stuff. It's brilliant.
And we're getting somewhere. We're getting, the whole methodology is really about putting ourselves out of business, which might sound strange, but that's, to me, that's how you solve the problem, right? And we shouldn't worry about that, because there are still a lot of problems to solve. It's not like we have a scarcity of problems. So
absolutely,
let's never get ourselves into a mindset of saying, oh no, I've just got to keep building this because I can't let this go. And, I've got to be the one that remains here. How about let's solve the things and move on to the next problem, the next excitement, the next opportunity.
So don't get attached.
No, which is an interesting one, isn't it, when you think about what I just described?
Yeah, it is.
Because it's full of attachment in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The most powerful kind, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm a mama bear with it. If I see someone coming in with an intention that's going to take us off or derail us from meeting that systemic change, and by systemic change, I mean, let's hope and expect that one day we look back and say, oh, remember when we didn't do that and it was crazy? Look at it, you wouldn't consider that it doesn't happen. That's where I want to get it to, so that every student in this situation, their school just does it as a matter of course. It's just like having a wheelchair ramp in a school. or
and that will come, and that will come, just like everything else has.
Yep. And
But
that's
it takes visionaries
we'll,
like you to create that. Someone's got to go first.
Someone's got to go first.
Yeah.
And that going first is, let's just be honest here. This is not easy. We get criticised.
Of course you do. You probably got told you were mad. It never would work. What's the point? They'll get better. They'll go back. You're creating,
or ignored.
Wasting money, or look, I don't know, they're going off on another tangent, all sorts of things. Where did I read something where if they don't understand you, they think you're mad?
Yes. People would look at me all the time like I'm mad. People would change the subject. People didn't care. People would just...
It's uncomfortable, isn't it? It's uncomfortable for some people.
Well, it is uncomfortable, and then some people just really don't get it and they don't care. And of course,
what? I don't mind that they don't get it and they don't care, as long as they don't get in the way.
Well, and sometimes we do get blockers, especially in complex environments like government systems and schools.
That's a huge challenge in itself. That's called bureaucracy, which
it is.
Yeah.
But there are ways through it. This is what I've learned. I mean, probably because I've to come to your point, which is, as long as people don't get in the way, it's, for me, there's always another way. And when you encounter that barrier, the best thing,
another way.
If you find another way, it's called a critical constraint on a project. And you've got to fulfill your project scope, so you have to find another way, and often that way's better.
So is it like saying there's more than one way to skin a cat? Is that
absolutely
that sort of saying?
Well, so, it is, yeah.
So we've been talking about this for quite some time now. How did you prepare for your TED Talk, which is constrained to, you were telling me previously, anywhere between 12 to 19 to 20 minutes.
Yes.
How do you explain something this intricate, this emotional, this much depth in that time constraint? What was it like preparing for it? What did it feel like being on stage presenting it?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that happens when it's a TED Talk is, of course, you bring with it all of the understanding that it's a TED Talk.
Yeah, so I know, right?
It's a little bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But the people who, the volunteers who, manage the whole sort of TED or TEDx processes are amazing people, and there's so much support given there too, right? Because they have a vested interest in this turning out well, and they want you to succeed. So there's a lot of support around, preparing you and supporting you to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be a panel person. Sit me on a panel and, ask me questions, even put me on Media Live, away I go. Preparing for speeches is not my favorite thing. And I suppose what I'm most proud of with preparing for the TED Talk is that I gave myself a sort of a game plan where I realized I needed to get some added support from a coach. And so I, scheduled sessions, and I had the story, as you've heard a fair bit of that story today. And so, we sort of sat down and we tried to work out what they call a through line in the TED sort of methodology, which is, it's that idea worth spreading. What's that key message, and what's going to flow through from beginning to end, and that's the line you hold. So one way or another, that journey through the talk comes back to that through line. And it was so good to have the support of somebody who had prepared a number of TEDx speakers, and to have that coach to I prepared it all, I rehearsed it all, and all of those things. But to have somebody who could just say, what about this? And, you know, and even getting down to at the end to posture and pauses and emphasis and all those sort of things as we went through and rehearsed. But one of the great accomplishments for me of doing the TEDx talk was in the preparation and the diligence and the discipline that I applied to that I hadn't ever applied to the process of, you know, making a presentation before. You know, this was one where you couldn't leave it to the last minute, you know.
How long did it take to prepare?
Well, months really, but I suppose down to the last 4 weeks is where the rubber really hits the road.
Yep.
And
well, it was brilliant. I watched it.
Thank you.
Loved it.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful opportunity once again to share. You know, as I said, the Churchill Fellowship is one that its reputation can carry a lot of gravitas around an important subject, or a subject that's important to the person. And it's the same with TED and TEDx. And I did get the opportunity to present at Sydney TEDx in the Hub and for St George Foundation. And that was, I guess, a warm-up for the one in Canberra. So to be able to do those without notes that's also a great feeling.
It's a great achievement. It's not easy. I've done a few keynotes myself, and yes, it's preparation, and yeah, just constantly practicing, isn't it? And making sure you're on your game. But, you know, presenting in different places other than TED is a little bit more relaxing. But the minute, as you said, you know, it's a TED talk, and all of a sudden you have these images in your mind of perfection and the pressure's on. So, but no, that was brilliant to watch. And following on from there, very exciting news this year, 2019 Telstra Business Women's Awards for purpose, in the category of purpose and social enterprise. Now, you know, you're a finalist in the ACT in that category. What did that feel like once you actually won, you know, became one of the finalists at the awards? Where was the awards ceremony? Was that Sydney?
So what we have is, no, it was here in the ACT, so at state level. And so I won in that category at state level. So now all of us go through to the national awards ceremony, which is in mid-May in Sydney. And so we go through in our category. So there'll be eight in the for purpose and social enterprise category, 8 state winners.
Yep.
And so then one of us will be the winner, of that category. But we also go through with the opportunity to win the actual National Telstra Business Women's Award as well. So you get to go through in your category, but you also have the opportunity. You're in the game to win the prize.
So the national award, does that all come from the categories?
So I didn't realise this when you asked me how I felt when I won in my category in the ACT. I was shocked actually, because I'd had a moment like that last year when I was a finalist in the ACT. I was a finalist in the Australian of the Year Awards, and my name wasn't called out in at that point in time, because it all just seems so surreal. You know what I mean? Even being there seems surreal. And so when my name was called out this time, I think I might have, because they film it all, and I think I might have even pulled a bit of an ugly crying face as I walked up to get the award. But I didn't want to. I just thought that was it. I thought, great. And there was an ACT Telstra Business Woman of the Year, and I just thought, well, she goes through, and that's it. I didn't realise that you go through in your category, and I also didn't realise, and I think this is the question you were asking, is that we go through in our category to win our potentially win our category award, but we're also in the running for the award of
Telstra
2019 Telstra Businesswoman of the Year.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's a clean slate again, if you know what I mean. And there's
another. And that's May this year.
Yes. So it's in the 16th of May. So
good luck with that, because you're tough competition to beat, I'm feeling.
I imagine that the women stepping up to that will be super amazing, and but just to be,
you're in great company though. I mean,
just to be there, to
get to that level in your career, that would be pretty satisfying, I would have thought. If
it is,
I could get to that level, that would be incredibly satisfying.
Well, I urge everybody to, you know, listening, all your business women, just to don't imagine it's outside of your reach. It's totally within your reach. If you asked me, you know, early last year, would I have imagined what happened in the year that's followed? No. But I never did it for the awards. And this is the point. I did it to solve a problem that is worth solving. And, you know, we talked about earlier, you know, the fact that people thought I was mad. Yes, they did. That people didn't know what I was carrying on about, that people thought it was time to stop, that I talked about it too much, or I cared too much, that people didn't care. One of the great validating experiences for me through those external validations has been to say, no, this is important, and I'm not the only one who can see that. You know,
it's
to actually
great, isn't it?
achieve that is the accomplishment, as well as supporting the kids, is to say we now have that an organisation and an institution like the Telstra Business Women's Awards, because they've been around for 24 years. Telstra were doing this as an engineering firm, a telecoms firm, before this was fashionable. Yeah. And so that, you know, they carry a lot of kudos, those that institution, and that propels the mission along, which is just no matter what comes next, that is so helpful to the mission.
And so sweet.
Yes, it is.
And sweet.
Yeah. So
all the hard work. So
it is hard work.
I'm going to ask you, you know, of all the discussions that we've had around what's been going on, it's incredible stuff that you're doing, and it's mind-boggling, really, to be able to. It's not easy when you're coming against such resistance, being told that you're talking too much about it, being told that is it really that important, you know, all the stuff that goes on in society. When you're the odd one out, it's tough to stand alone. So to show the courage and resilience you have shows a sense of character. So let me talk about personal heroes. Do you have any? Who are your personal heroes, and why do you hold them with such high regard, I guess? And I'm trying to connect your character with personal heroes, because, you know, personal heroes are people that we obviously connect with on a values, on a conscience sort of level.
Yes, so it's a great question, and it's probably changed over time. And I probably have many more heroes than I'll remember in this moment. But I think especially when I was going through that time with Darcy, I did look for ways to bolster him. And one of the ways I did that, you know, he was 10 at the time, so it's a bit of an unorthodox thing to be kind of training in a 10-year-old. But I'd say to him every day, Darcy, what did Winston Churchill used to say? And he'd answer, when you're going through hell, keep going. And I taught him that, and that became our mantra. And I didn't remember that, until I was standing outside of the cottage, the Churchill Foundation cottage, which is here in Canberra where the interview took place. I didn't remember that I'd done that. So I guess I have to, Winston Churchill is a hero because he, anybody who's read his story or watched, he made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes in World War One. You could almost say he was a villain. Do you know what I mean? To people, but he went against the grain when he knew, he could see something that other people weren't prepared to do, and that took enormous courage. If you look at the stakes, and so I relate a lot to his story, and I relate a lot to the fact that, and I was asked this question in the interview, which was, what are your thoughts about Winston Churchill? After all, this is a fellowship in his honour. And what I said was that, to me, he demonstrated, and the way that I felt like it compared to my own situation was that he continued to display courage and persistence in the face of absolute defeat. And that's what the thought of losing my child was. And so if I was able to exemplify that, then I had a role model in circumstances that were much bigger than mine. So another hero, I suppose, of recent times is the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for, a woman sitting on the bench of the Supreme Court in the US to go through what she went through to get there, and to be a, conscientious dissenter on many, many occasions. And, to actually watch a woman of that age be turned into memes by young people, yeah, because she was able to stand for what they believed in and represented. Yeah. And, her own story of supporting her husband through illness with a small child, to study law the way she did, and to support him and be a mother, is just, it's just completely inspirational. So, when I watch those stories, I just feel like, those people who have been at the frontier, and it helps you in those moments of loneliness to know that there are other people out there doing these things. And I guess the last is, a category of heroes, and that's, for me, everyday people who might not get the accolades, who might not know how to apply for the grants or the whatever, but they're making our world better. They're, in their own way, disruptors, and that might be quietly, but and we meet so many of them if we dare to look and dare to listen to people's stories. I'm always surprised what people tell me when I sit down and make time to talk to them.
I couldn't agree with you more with that. And we don't do enough of that in our crazy, fast-paced world. We don't take the time to speak to the person next to us.
Exactly. And every person's life, if you really listen in and ask questions, and if they're willing to tell you, it sounds a little bit like fiction, doesn't it?
It does. There's so many pearls in there. So
many. And so I feel like, the everyday heroes are just around us, hidden in plain sight. And I get great courage from talking to people. Yeah.
I love that. I love that answer, actually. That's very insightful, given that we're always looking for the big the big names or the bigger stories, or the ones that, you know, Winston Churchill's a totally different story, but, you know, people who hit the headlines with certain success in diversity that they've had, or whatever seems to have happened in their lives. But we do take for granted the everyday person around us that, as you say, are disruptors, but, you know, get on and get things done, and you never hear anything from them, but they just do it.
Yeah.
You know,
and some
day in, day out.
Well, some people you speak to, and it's remarkable that they've made it to adulthood, and I'm not exaggerating here, you know, and it's just that what they've gone through to actually be standing before you is, and they don't seem to think it's anything extraordinary.
No. So that leads me to my last question. This quote I read said, what is ordinary to you is extraordinary to me. So what is your superpower? And that's so true, because I can't agree with that anymore. You know, what you and I may think is, oh, that's nothing, I just do that, is extraordinary to other people. So what is your superpower, Megan?
Being able to help people articulate their superpower.
That's a great answer. Getting people to see their own superpower and their purpose and get their clarity.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good superpower.
Well, I used to, when I started my business in 2014, after, you know, going through that journey with Darcy, and crazily enough, I came back and thought I'd slip in a master's degree the year following. That
what do you mean slip in a master's? You don't just slip in a master's degree. You don't have it between a cup of coffee and, you know, in your tea break.
I did.
Yeah.
And at the time I just thought, what I did realize was my brain wasn't working properly. But anyway, through all of that, I started a business, and it took me, you know, when I say I started a business, this had been something, this idea of starting a business, this idea of finding my thing, had been going on, I would say, for at least 10 years, really seriously. And it was just elusive. I just couldn't nail it down. I couldn't grab a hold of it. It always felt like it was flying past me and I just missed it, kind of thing. And you know, I often, not formally coaching people, but people would come and ask me for advice on things, and I'd support them, and off they'd go and they'd do it. And I'd often find myself in my lowest moments, you know, tearfully saying to my husband, why can I help everybody else find what they've got to do, but I don't know what mine is? And he'd say, that is what you do.
That is what you do. You just did it. You've been doing it.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to your phrase and quote that you've pulled out there, which is, to me, that just seemed, I said, I can't make a business of that. That's not anything. And because I didn't see it as anything extraordinary, and yet that's probably the thing that I'm most told about people, is that I've been able to help them find insights about themselves or what they could do that they weren't able to see before. And why I didn't think it was, you know, anything to write home about was that when we make that discovery together, it's just like, yeah, well, there it is. It was already there, wasn't it? And they're like, yeah. And, you know, it's kind of like, I haven't really done anything. But I suppose it's, maybe I help people shine the light on things. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it. So there you go.
Well, I think you've got a sense of insight. You've got the smarts, the personality. You've got something innately that's you that allows that to come out in the other person, and the other person desperately needs that, because you can get caught up in your own head, caught up in your own thing, or, you know, whilst you're getting caught up in all of that, you can get caught up in what you think you should be, what you've told you should be, and that in itself should be so confusing. So I've thrown all those things out. And how confusing is that? So you need someone to cut through the crap, excuse the French, and go, you know what about this? Because I'm seeing this. And it's like that moment of, oh, really?
There it is. It's right there in plain sight, just sitting there off to the side. That's how it usually is experienced. And
I don't think that, I haven't come across people in my lifetime that can actually do that. They don't have the emotional intelligence. They don't have the connection. I don't even know how to express it. They just don't have the compassion or the connection to be able to work that out with the other person. It takes a certain depth.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the other thing that sits with it is I have an interest in and a love of and a passion for global trends, and being able to kind of marry those two things up is somebody's what I would call gift. And this is my business model that I'm developing out now, is this global insights for transforming society is what you uniquely can see, given your background, given your experience, given your worldview. Just like, I guess, how I could see what maybe other people couldn't see in that missing school situation. That was a product of everything that I am, my values, the way I've been brought up, my all that work experience that I said was so eclectic and didn't make sense. Every element of that has helped me to do what I've done, such that now it looks like it was by design,
And is that not interesting? Because you said at the start you didn't know, what was your purpose? What were you meant to be doing? And it all culminated to that point. Yeah,
and I have, I used to go and get counselling and things like that to I always had this sense that I feel like I should be doing something and I'm not doing it. I feel like there's something for me to do, and what is it? And I'd go to career counsellors, and I'd go to, other types of counsellors, and
Were they helpful?
Not really, because it wasn't until, I guess, I was able to marry that all up myself through my experiences. And I have to say, including this part of this is about, that archetypal journey of the hero's journey. It's like we almost go through the valley in order to realize and draw from, it might not have to be adversity as I explained it, through Darcy's story, but unless we feel out of alignment, out of sync, and really feel the edge of wanting to know what our purpose is and what we can do and how we can apply ourselves, then we're not going to find it, are we?
No, and there's a lot of discomfort around that.
Yeah, unless we're out of comfort. And oftentimes in our lives, we'll be out of comfort when we've grown to a certain point where we need to see realized all that we've learned and all that we can see. So I really, really, truly trust timing as well. And so what I know now about my, those going through those times and feeling like so not dissatisfied because I had an amazing life, but just like there was something I hadn't satisfied yet in myself. And I never have that feeling now. I never have that feeling because I'm doing what I'm good at, and I'm doing what I value.
You found your calling.
Yeah, I have. And I'm looking forward to, I feel like I'm going through a little bit of an evolution at the moment, and it's uncomfortable too at times, but you also get to play with, well, what's around the corner and what's next, and what does that look like, and the possibility is really exciting. So
well,
yeah.
everything you're doing so far has been incredible. I wish you all the best in the Telstra Business Women's Awards, because I know that I'm rooting for you. And yeah,
I feel like I've already won, because
well, you have
there
because the acknowledgement and to win in the ACT in your category, that is brilliant.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
It's so good for the cause, and I look forward to that day where I can say, you know, I've gotten this thing in missing school to the point now where I know it won't go backwards. I know it's always, all of this has always been about the cause for you. So I know that. Yeah. Only I've been a volunteer. I've put millions of dollars of my time into this, and it's only been in the very, very recent past that I've received any payment for it. And it's not a payment as we would know in our careers. It's not of that sort of level, but it's the reward has come through the two things I mentioned, is meeting the mission, but also the gift and the healing for me through that journey. And it has been a gift and a healing for me, has been to discover what I can do when I stop getting caught up in the story that it's not possible, because this just had to happen. So, along it went, and sometimes dragged me. So that's also been a really beautiful journey of discovery and surprise and delight. And I never expected it to sort of be at this level ever. I just thought maybe I'd sneak it over the line at some point,
Well, thank you for your courage, and thank you for your persistence and your resilience, and thank you for your time, Megan Gilmour. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for having me, and for everyone who's listening, thank you for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Megan.